I still remember that fateful morning as if it were a scene in a vivid nightmare. My wife, with cold nonchalance, wiped out our son's entire college fund and then ran off with her boyfriend. In those first 100 words, my heart shattered and my mind spiraled into disbelief. The air was thick with betrayal and anguish as I stood frozen, hearing our 10-year-old son's quiet, yet piercing words, "Daddy, why did Mommy do that?" In that moment, I felt every hope and every sacrifice crumble beneath the weight of a truth too painful to bear, a truth that would forever alter the course of our family's destiny. I had always believed that we were a family bound by mutual sacrifice and unwavering commitment. For 18 years, my wife and I had built what we thought was a stable, loving home, diligently saving for our son's future, a future that included a promise of a bright college education. Every month, without fail, I set aside a portion of my paycheck for his fund, imagining the day he would step onto a prestigious campus, confident and ready to conquer the world. I took pride in that promise, believing it was a testament to our love and the secure life we were creating for him. That morning, as I sat at the kitchen table sipping my coffee, I noticed an unfamiliar tension in the air. The silence that usually accompanied our early hours was pierced by hushed voices coming from the living room. Curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of dread, compelled me to investigate. I found my wife hurriedly packing a small bag, her face pale and eyes avoiding mine, while a man, someone I'd never seen before, sat calmly on the sofa. It wasn't long before the truth became painfully clear. With barely a word, she had wiped out the entire college fund that I had painstakingly built over the years and was leaving with this stranger, her new boyfriend. The shock hit me like a freight train. I stood rooted to the spot as my mind struggled to comprehend the enormity of her betrayal. The money I had saved, every sacrifice I'd made, had been erased in a single, heartless act. And then, almost as if to punctuate the tragedy, I heard a small, trembling voice behind me. I turned to see our 10-year-old son, eyes wide with confusion and sorrow, whisper, "Daddy, why did Mommy do that?" His simple question struck me harder than any scream. It was a plea for understanding from a child who could not fathom the cruelty of the world. In that moment, time seemed to slow. I felt a mix of overwhelming grief and a fierce, burning anger. How could she do this to us? My thoughts raced back to all those quiet evenings when I'd reassured him that our future was secure, that every sacrifice was for his sake. Now, that promise was shattered. I felt betrayed not only as a husband but as a father. Every memory of laughter around the dinner table, every shared dream of a bright future, now turned to ash. 4 hours that day, I wandered through the house in a daze, unable to process the surreal horror of what had just transpired. I replayed every moment, her hurried glances, the way she avoided my eyes, and that man's presence which felt so alien yet somehow intertwined with our shattered family. The weight of her actions pressed down on me, and I retreated to my study, where I locked myself away with a journal. I scribbled furiously, trying to capture the flood of emotions, betrayal, hurt, anger, and an indescribable sorrow that cut deeper than I ever thought possible. As the day wore on, I began to confront a painful reality. I was now faced with a future that had been unceremoniously rewritten by my wife's choices. I knew that I couldn't change the past, but I had to decide how to move forward. Was I going to allow this act to define me, to let my self-worth be measured by the money lost and the betrayal endured? Or would I rise above it, determined to rebuild a future for my son and for myself, even if that meant walking away from a marriage that had been built on deception? My mind churned with memories of the sacrifices I'd made. I remembered the extra shifts at work, the skipped nights out with friends, and every time I had carefully calculated my expenses to save for my son's education. All of that, it seemed, was for nothing. The sense of injustice was palpable, and with every passing minute, a quiet resolve began to form within me. I decided that I would not let this be the end of my story. Instead, it would be the catalyst for a transformation, a rebirth from the ashes of betrayal. In the ensuing hours, I called my closest friend, Mark, whose voice had always been a source of steady reassurance. Over the phone, I vented about the shock and disbelief, and he listened without interruption. "You deserve better, man," he said softly, and those words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply with me. I knew that I had to reclaim my power, not just for myself, but for my son, who deserved a future untainted by the mistakes of others. That night, I sat in my dimly lit study, surrounded by the remnants of what once was a promise of security. I began mapping out a plan, a way to secure our future, to build a life that was not defined by the cruel actions of the past. I resolved to focus on what truly mattered, the love I had for my son and the unwavering belief that every setback was merely a setup for a comeback. I penned down a list of goals, ranging from practical steps like reviewing our finances and seeking legal counsel to personal ambitions such as pursuing a hobby I'd long abandoned and reconnecting with supportive friends. As the hours passed and the pain slowly receded into a background hum, I realized that my wife's betrayal, as devastating as it was, had also given me an unexpected gift, the opportunity to reassess my values and to redefine my priorities. I began to see that the college fund, which had been wiped out so callously, was a symbol not of failure but of the system that had let greed and deceit override genuine love and sacrifice. It was a reminder that, sometimes, the harshest setbacks force us to forge our own path, unbound by the expectations of others. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in research and introspection. I met with financial advisors and legal experts to understand the full scope of the damage, and to explore every option available to rebuild what had been lost. I spent countless hours poring over bank statements, investment records, and even family emails that once held promises of a secure future for my son. With each piece of information, I felt both the sting of betrayal and a growing determination to turn the tide. Amid all this, my son's quiet question from that dreadful day echoed in my mind over and over, "Daddy, why did Mommy do that?" I knew that answering him honestly meant confronting the painful truth of what had happened, but it also meant forging a path toward healing and restoration. I vowed that I would not let his innocence be marred by bitterness. Instead, I would work tirelessly to build a future where he could look forward to a life filled with opportunities and love, free from the shadows of deceit and abandonment. With a renewed sense of purpose, I began taking steps to secure a stable future. I started by setting up a new savings plan for my son's education, one that, while not a replacement for the lost funds, would serve as a stepping stone toward re-establishing our financial security. I also reconnected with a network of friends and former colleagues who had always admired my work ethic and integrity. Their support, combined with the insights I'd gained from financial experts, helped me formulate a plan to slowly, steadily rebuild our future. Every day, as I moved through the aftermath of betrayal, I felt the weight of my choices lifting just a bit more. I began to see that my worth was not determined by the actions of my ex-wife or the dismissive words of a family that had abandoned me. Instead, it was built on the love I gave, the sacrifices I made, and the resilience that now propelled me forward. I started journaling again, this time with a new focus on gratitude and growth. I wrote about the small victories, the first deposit into the new college fund, a kind word from a supportive friend, the smile on my son's face when he realized that we were still a family, even if it was now redefined by love and determination. I found solace in the simple routines of everyday life. Evenings became sacred moments spent with my son, reading bedtime stories, cooking together, and talking about his dreams for the future. Each shared moment was a healing balm, a reminder that true family isn't measured in dollars or grand gestures but in the everyday acts of love and care. I began to see that our bond was unbreakable, even in the face of the most heart-wrenching betrayal. As the days turned into weeks, I started to notice a subtle shift in my own perspective. I wasn't consumed by revenge or bitter resentment anymore. Instead, I was learning to channel that pain into something constructive, a force that would drive me to rebuild, to innovate, and to prove that I was worth every sacrifice. I embraced the belief that every setback, every moment of pain, was a stepping stone toward a future where my self-worth was defined by my own achievements, not by the shallow judgments of others. And so, as I stand on the cusp of a new chapter, I feel a quiet determination building inside me, a resolve to reclaim my identity and rebuild my life, no matter how many obstacles lie in my path. My journey is far from over. I know there will be days of doubt, moments when the ghosts of betrayal resurface to haunt me. But I also know that every day I choose to rise, every small victory I claim, brings me one step closer to a future defined by love, integrity, and the unwavering belief that I am worthy of every good thing life has to offer. In the wake of that shattering revelation, every minute of the following days felt like an eternity of emotional isolation and relentless inner turmoil. I was left reeling from the bitter taste of betrayal. Not only had my wife erased years of our hard-won savings in a single, careless act, but my 10-year-old son's quiet, heart-wrenching question, "Daddy, why did Mommy do that?" echoed in my mind as a constant reminder of the innocence I had failed to protect. The nights blurred together as I oscillated between an overwhelming sense of loss and a simmering desire for retribution, unsure whether to sink into despair or rise to confront the unforgiving reality of my shattered family. For the first several days, I found myself locked in a private battle with my emotions. I isolated myself in the spare room of our modest apartment, trying desperately to piece together the fragments of my broken spirit. I would sit for hours with a cup of black coffee in hand, staring blankly out the window as rain dripped down the glass, each droplet mirroring the tears I couldn't hold back. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed that moment of revelation, the cold, dismissive tone of my wife's words, and the haunting echo of my son's innocent query. I questioned everything. How could someone I had once trusted so completely reduce our future to nothing? What had driven her to gamble away our son's future in one callous act? And why did my own heart feel so heavy, as if every sacrifice I'd made was suddenly invalid? In those dark hours, I found a reluctant outlet in my journal. I scribbled furiously, letting every raw, unfiltered thought spill onto the pages. I wrote about the nights I had spent working overtime, saving every extra penny for our son's college fund, a fund I believed was a promise of a better life for him, and how now it was nothing more than a cruel joke. The journal entries became a mirror, reflecting the depth of my pain, the sting of betrayal, and a burgeoning resolve that began to flicker amid the ruins of my trust. Even as I sank deeper into introspection, a part of me couldn't ignore the practical realities of our new life. The future my wife had once promised us was now nothing more than a shattered illusion, and I was left to face the fallout on my own. I began the slow, painful process of re-evaluating our finances. I pored over bank statements, revisited investment accounts, and sought advice from a trusted financial advisor who had been a friend long before this nightmare unfolded. Every line of balance sheet data was a reminder of the sacrifices I had made, and of the future that was slipping away. I had to act, not only for my own dignity but for the sake of my son's future. His tiny, uncertain face haunted me every time I looked in the mirror. I knew that no matter how deep the betrayal, I had to find a way to rebuild the security that had been so callously destroyed. I started making plans. First, I contacted a legal consultant to discuss my options regarding the wiped-out funds. I needed to know if there was any recourse to recover what had been lost, not necessarily to undo what my wife had done, but to salvage the future we had worked so hard to secure. The legal conversations were clinical and often heartless in their detachment, but they provided me with a semblance of direction. I learned about possible claims of financial misappropriation and the rights I might have as a partner and as a parent, even though the betrayal was personal, not strictly legal. Every piece of advice, every consultation, was a step toward regaining control. At the same time, I found that the overwhelming grief could not be solved solely by legal means. I needed to heal emotionally. I reached out to a therapist, Dr. Amelia Reyes, a compassionate professional who specialized in family trauma and betrayal. In our first session, I broke down in tears, recounting every painful detail of that day, the shock in my son's eyes, the cold dismissals from my wife, and the crushing weight of feeling utterly abandoned by the one person who should have been my partner in building a future. Dr. Reyes listened intently, her calm presence a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. Healing, she told me gently, is not about forgetting or excusing the hurt. It's about reclaiming your power, piece by piece, and learning to live your truth despite the pain. Those words began to sink in, and slowly, I started to see that I had a choice. I could let this betrayal define me, or I could use it as a stepping stone to rebuild a life that honored my worth and safeguarded my son's future. Throughout this period, my 10-year-old son became both my greatest source of comfort and the focal point of my resolve. Every day, as I helped him with homework or listened to him recount his small adventures at school, I was reminded of why I had worked so hard to secure a better future for him. His innocence, his unfiltered questions, and even his quiet moments of confusion about the changes at home propelled me forward. I made a promise to him, one that I whispered softly during a bedtime story one night, that I would do everything in my power to protect him, to ensure that his future would be bright, and that no one would ever take away his dreams. That promise, simple yet profound, became the bedrock upon which I began to rebuild my life. As days turned into weeks, I started venturing out of the confines of my apartment. I reconnected with a few close friends who had always been there before the betrayal, and together we began to navigate the murky waters of heartbreak and recovery. Late-night conversations at our favorite cafe, long walks through the park, and shared silences filled with understanding gradually helped me piece together a new sense of self. I realized that the pain I had experienced was a signal, not of weakness, but of the depth of my capacity to love and to hope. I began to see that every hardship carried within it the seeds of resilience, waiting to sprout if only I would nurture them with self-compassion and determination. Yet, even as I started to heal, the desire for retribution simmered just beneath the surface. I couldn't shake the memory of that devastating morning, the sound of my wife's voice dismissing my years of sacrifice, the shock in my son's eyes as he asked, "Daddy, why did Mommy do that?" I knew that revenge wouldn't bring back what had been lost, but a part of me longed for a way to restore the balance, to make the world see that my worth was not something to be trifled with. I began researching stories of personal triumph over betrayal, reading about individuals who had turned their pain into power. I discovered that sometimes, the path to reclaiming your self-worth lies in channeling that burning anger into constructive change. I started brainstorming ways to rebuild our financial future, to create a safety net that could compensate for the stolen funds, and to eventually ensure that my son's dreams would not be crushed by the recklessness of others. Every morning, as I rose to face the day, I made a conscious effort to transform the bitterness of my past into a driving force for the future. I set small, achievable goals, reorganizing my finances, scheduling therapy sessions, and planning activities that would bring joy to my son's life. I began to write down my aspirations in a new journal, one that was filled with not just the pain of betrayal, but also with a vision for what I wanted to achieve. I wrote about opening a new college fund for my son, about investing in his education with renewed determination, and about rebuilding the trust and love that had been shattered. Each word was a reminder that I was more than the sum of my heartbreak, a man capable of transformation, of rising above the cruelty of those who had once dismissed me. I also threw myself into my work with a renewed intensity. The projects I once pursued with a sense of obligation now took on a different meaning. Each task, each meeting, was an opportunity to prove to myself that I was capable of greatness, that I could build something enduring out of the ruins of my past. I sought out new professional challenges, attended workshops, and even considered venturing into entrepreneurial endeavors that aligned with my vision of a secure, thriving future for my family. The boardroom, once a place of unyielding expectations and hidden judgments, became a battleground where I fought not only for professional success but for the validation of my own self-worth. Every accomplishment, no matter how small, was a victory over the doubts that had once held me captive. Amid these personal and professional endeavors, the most poignant moments were those spent quietly with my son. On weekends, we would take long walks through the city's parks, where the world seemed to slow down, and his laughter became the soundtrack of my resilience. In those moments, as he asked questions about the stars or the birds that flew overhead, I felt a fierce determination to protect his innocence and to ensure that he would grow up in a world where his dreams were nurtured, not crushed by the failings of others. I made it my mission to create new traditions, simple, heartfelt rituals that would replace the bitter memories of a broken family with the promise of hope and renewal. We started cooking our favorite meals together, reading stories aloud, and even planting a small garden on the apartment balcony, a living symbol of growth emerging from the hard soil of our past. Slowly, the anger that had once burned so intensely began to soften. I realized that while I could never completely erase the pain of being disowned, I could choose to let it propel me forward rather than hold me back. I began to forgive, not for my wife or my parents, but for my own sake, so that I could move forward without the constant weight of resentment. It was a difficult, sometimes excruciating process, but with each passing day, I felt lighter, more in control of my own destiny. I understood that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about freeing myself from its grip and creating space for a future defined by my own terms. As autumn slowly gave way to winter, I started to see glimmers of a new life emerging from the darkness. I reconnected with long-forgotten passions, picking up an old guitar, revisiting books on philosophy and resilience, and even writing poetry that captured the raw essence of my journey. My creative expressions became both a catharsis and a declaration of my renewed identity. I began sharing some of my writings with a small, supportive community online, and the feedback was both surprising and uplifting. People resonated with my story of pain transformed into purpose, and that connection with strangers served as a powerful reminder that I was not alone. In those transformative months, every day felt like a careful negotiation between the shadows of my past and the bright, uncertain promise of tomorrow. I was no longer the man who had been defined by my wife's betrayal or my family's dismissal. I was becoming someone who could look back on the wreckage and see, not only the scars but also the strength they represented. I was building a future for my son, ensuring that his education, his dreams, and his happiness were secure, even if the money we had lost could never be fully replaced. Now, as I prepare to step into the next chapter of my life, I feel a quiet certainty deep within me, a conviction that every hardship has laid the groundwork for a future where my worth is defined solely by my own actions, my resilience, and my love for those who truly matter. The journey so far has been long and painful, but it has also been a journey of self-discovery, of learning that my value is inherent, and that no one's callous words can diminish the light that burns within. I stand at this crossroads with a heart that has been tested by betrayal, yet remains unyielding, with a spirit that has been battered, but now soars on the wings of hope and determination. I am ready to rebuild, to create new traditions, and to forge a future where every setback is just a prelude to a triumphant comeback. My journey through this storm has taught me that sometimes, the most profound transformations come not from what we lose, but from what we choose to reclaim, and I am determined to reclaim my life, my legacy, and the promise of a future filled with love, resilience, and unshakable worth. That night, as I sat alone in the silence of our empty living room, I realized that my world had shifted irrevocably. The echoes of my 10-year-old son's trembling question, "Daddy, why did Mommy do that?" still reverberated in my mind, merging with the memories of betrayal and heartbreak. For years, I had meticulously built a future for him, a future represented by his college fund, a fund I had nurtured with every ounce of sacrifice. And now, that promise had been wiped out by my wife's reckless decision to run off with her boyfriend, leaving our family shattered and my identity questioned. I spent the early hours of that long, dark night ruminating on the choices that had led us here. I could no longer hide behind excuses or justify the pain with hollow optimism. The devastation was raw and real, yet deep within me a quiet determination began to take shape. I realized that if I were to honor my son's future, and reclaim my own sense of worth, I had to start rebuilding, brick by brick, from the ruins of what once was. The betrayal had cut deep, but it also forced me to confront an undeniable truth. I was responsible for forging a new path, one where my love for my son and my commitment to integrity would serve as the guiding lights. In the days that followed, I embarked on a painstaking journey of healing and redefinition. I closed the door on the life I once knew, packing up my belongings from our old home, a painful but necessary step toward moving on. I moved into a small, modest apartment, a safe haven where I could focus solely on the future. The space was humble, yet it radiated a sense of possibility, a blank canvas on which I could finally rewrite my story. Every morning, I woke with a heavy heart but also with a resolve that grew stronger with the rising sun. My first priority was to secure a new financial foundation for my son's education. I contacted every financial advisor I could find, scrutinized every bank statement, and painstakingly crafted a new savings plan. I learned about different investment strategies, read countless articles on college funds, and even attended seminars that promised to help parents rebuild what had been lost. Slowly, I began to see glimmers of hope in the numbers, a future where my son's dreams were not completely dashed by one moment of betrayal. Each small deposit, each careful calculation, became a testament to my unwavering determination to secure his future, no matter how many obstacles lay in the way. At the same time, I had to confront the emotional fallout. Therapy became my lifeline. I began meeting regularly with Dr. Ramirez, a compassionate counselor who specialized in family trauma and betrayal. In our sessions, I unraveled the layers of hurt that had accumulated over the years, the sacrifices I made that went unnoticed, the years I spent believing that love meant enduring silent pain, and the crushing weight of my wife's abandonment. Dr. Ramirez taught me that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the wrongdoing, it was about liberating myself from the chains of resentment. Holding on to anger, she explained in one session, only dims your inner light. Forgiveness is the first step in reclaiming your life. Slowly, I began to let go of the bitterness. I learned to see my son's tearful eyes not as a sign of weakness, but as a call to build a future defined by compassion and strength. Every day was a battle, a tug-of-war between the painful memories of that fateful moment and the relentless drive to create a better future. I found solace in the little things. Evenings became sacred rituals when I sat with my son on the worn-out sofa, reading stories and playing board games that brought laughter back into our home. His resilience and innocent joy served as constant reminders that life was still worth living, that hope could emerge from the darkest of times. I began documenting these moments, writing in a new journal that focused not just on the pain but on the gradual steps toward healing. I recorded the small victories, the first time he smiled again without hesitation, the reassuring tone in his voice when he said, "Daddy, I love you," each note a reaffirmation that we were still a family, despite everything. Professionally, I redirected my energy into rebuilding my career. For years, I had dedicated myself to a stable job, one that paid the bills but left little room for passion. Now, fueled by the need to prove that I was more than the sum of my shattered dreams, I enrolled in evening classes and began exploring new avenues. I attended workshops on entrepreneurship, read voraciously about personal reinvention, and even started a side project, a blog where I chronicled my journey from betrayal to recovery. The process of sharing my story online was cathartic. I received messages from strangers who, like me, had felt the sting of family rejection. Their words of support were a balm to my wounded spirit, reminding me that my experiences resonated far beyond the confines of my own pain. As the weeks turned into months, I began to see a path forward. I started to build a new identity, one that was defined not by the cruelty of my wife's actions or my family's betrayal, but by the values I held dear: integrity, resilience, and the unwavering belief that every setback is a setup for a comeback. I reconnected with old friends who had always seen me for who I truly was, and I forged new relationships with people who celebrated authenticity and supported my dreams. These connections were vital. They provided not only emotional support but also practical guidance as I navigated the treacherous waters of starting over. One chilly evening, as I walked through a park blanketed with the vibrant hues of fall, I reflected on the metamorphosis that had taken root within me. The pain of being disowned was still there, a scar etched into my soul, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it had become a symbol of my strength, a constant reminder that I had the power to rise above even the deepest wounds. I realized that I was not destined to be a victim of circumstance. I was destined to be the architect of my own future. That realization galvanized me into action. I began setting new goals with fervor, not only to rebuild my son's college fund but to create a legacy that celebrated perseverance and self-worth. I poured my heart into learning new skills, attending seminars, and even considering a bold career change that aligned more closely with my passions. Every step forward was a triumph, a declaration that I was reclaiming my life piece by piece, regardless of the obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable. At the heart of it all was the enduring love for my son. His innocent questions, his unfiltered trust, and his quiet moments of joy were the guiding lights that steered me through the darkest nights. I knew that every decision I made, every risk I took, was not just for me, but for him, a promise that he would grow up in a world where his potential was nurtured, not squandered by the callous choices of others. I envisioned a future where he could attend college, pursue his dreams, and, one day, understand that his father had fought tooth and nail to protect his future, even when everything else had crumbled. I also began to explore creative outlets that helped channel my pain into something beautiful. I returned to writing with renewed purpose, crafting essays and poetry that captured the raw emotions of my journey. I took up photography, capturing moments of resilience in the faces of strangers and the quiet beauty of everyday life. These creative pursuits were not mere distractions, they were expressions of my inner transformation, each image and word a testament to the fact that even in the midst of profound loss, beauty and hope could still flourish. In those quiet moments of reflection, late at night, when the world was hushed and the only sound was the steady beat of my heart, I made a promise to myself. I vowed that I would not let the bitterness of betrayal define my future. I would use every painful lesson, every tear shed in silence, as a stepping stone toward a life of integrity, passion, and unwavering love. I resolved to build a legacy that honored the sacrifices I had made, not by clinging to the past, but by forging a future where every setback was transformed into an opportunity for growth. As the first hints of spring began to break through the winter chill, I saw my efforts bear fruit in small, meaningful ways. My new financial plan slowly started to accumulate savings, the blog gained a modest following of people who found solace in my words, and my relationships with friends and mentors deepened into sources of unwavering support. I began to understand that my journey was not a linear path to perfection, but a winding road of constant evolution, a process where every setback taught me a little more about resilience, every heartbreak deepened my capacity for empathy, and every small victory reaffirmed my belief in a brighter future. One pivotal moment came during a quiet evening at a local community center, where I attended a support group meeting for parents who had faced similar familial betrayals. As I shared my story, of lost dreams, shattered promises, and the relentless fight to protect my son, there was a palpable sense of solidarity in the room. The shared experiences of others, their words of encouragement and understanding, were like gentle reminders that I was not alone in my struggle. In that circle of empathy, I realized that healing was not about erasing the past but about integrating it into a narrative of strength and hope. The journey wasn't without its lingering shadows. There were moments when old wounds would reopen unexpectedly, a particular phrase, a subtle glance from a relative, or even a quiet, solitary evening when the memories of that fateful day came rushing back. In those moments, I would retreat into my journal or take long, meditative walks through the neighborhood, allowing the pain to surface so I could then acknowledge it and let it go. I learned that each painful memory was not a scar to hide but a reminder of the battles I'd fought and the resilience I'd built. I also began to consider what kind of future I wanted to create, not just for myself, but for my son. I attended workshops on personal development, financial planning, and even creative writing seminars that encouraged me to articulate a vision for the future. I envisioned a life where my son would grow up knowing that his worth was intrinsic, that he was loved unconditionally, and that even when the world seemed harsh, there was always hope. I set clear, long-term goals for his education and for our own life, goals that were driven not by the fear of loss, but by the desire to build something meaningful out of the fragments of our past. As the seasons changed, the tumultuous emotions that had once threatened to overwhelm me gradually settled into a steady rhythm of purpose. I redefined my identity on my own terms. I was no longer the man who had been deemed worthless by those I once called family. I was a fighter, a visionary, and a loving father determined to shape a future that reflected the values of hard work, integrity, and genuine care. Every day, as I navigated the challenges of rebuilding our financial security and nurturing my son's dreams, I felt a quiet, persistent hope that, despite the scars of betrayal, a new legacy was emerging, one built on the foundation of my own resilience and the unwavering belief that I was, in every sense, enough. Now, standing at the cusp of a new chapter, I see my journey not as a series of painful setbacks but as a tapestry of hard-fought victories. I am forging a path where my worth is measured by my own actions and the love I give, not by the dismissive words of those who once tried to tear me down. I know there will still be obstacles ahead, and the memory of that devastating day will always linger in the background, but it no longer defines me. Instead, it fuels my determination to create a future where my son grows up in a world of opportunities, where I am respected not for what I was denied, but for what I have built. Every morning, as I open my eyes to a new day filled with possibility, I am reminded that my past, no matter how painful, has given me the strength to redefine my destiny. I have transformed heartbreak into a driving force, and every step I take is a testament to the fact that I am not confined by the narrow judgments of my family. I have reclaimed my identity, and I am determined to build a legacy that stands as a beacon of hope and resilience for my son and for anyone who has ever been made to feel worthless. Today, I close this chapter of my story with a profound sense of gratitude and an unwavering resolve. The journey from betrayal to redemption has been long, and the scars remain as silent witnesses to the battles I have fought. But those scars are not marks of defeat, they are emblems of survival, proof that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit can rise, rebuild, and shine with an intensity that no one can ever take away. I am the author of my own destiny, and I will continue to write my story with courage, love, and the relentless pursuit of a future that is truly my own.